Hello and welcome to the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 61 of the Meet the Parents podcast and your weekly half hour of parenting chat. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and tonight I'm joined by Mark from Best Dad I Can Be. Good evening, Mark.
Tim, just you and me.
It is indeed, yeah, we've been abandoned by everyone else. But never mind, we shall persevere. So this week, as schools start the wind down towards the summer holidays, we're going to talk about academic tests and attendance awards. Parents of school children in Year 6 will be all too familiar with SATs. These tests assess whether pupils have met the expected standards in reading, writing and maths. Well, the results are in, and such is the nature of statistics, they represent either good news or bad news, depending how you look at it. So let's start by unpicking these results. Now, here's the main headline. This was the second year in which children were examined against a new national curriculum that was introduced in 2014. 61% of pupils in England met the expected standard in reading, writing and mathematics, compared with 53% last year. So basically we saw 8% more kids reach the required standard this year versus last year. So on the face of it, Mark, this looks good, doesn't it?
It does look good, yes. The SATs, I mean, it's a long time since I had a child doing SATs, but on the face of it, these results look good. But you and I would both say that 2 years isn't exactly a lengthy sample. Let's see what next year brings. As with so many things, Tim, 2 or 3 years down the line, we're going to have changed the rules again, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And even just looking at these 2 years, as you say, is that a representative sample on which to base a trend? Right, I think any mathematician will tell you it's not. And even then, I'm not so sure that it's as good as it's being made out. I mean, yes, 61% clearly is better than 53%, but such a big jump in itself in the space of just 12 months is something that would have any statistician worth their salt raising an eyebrow in the manner of a well-known half-human, half-Vulcan character from a certain well-known TV show. For starters, let's look at the other side of the coin. I mean, yes, 61% of primary school pupils met the expected standard across these core topics, but it also means that 39% fell short in at least one area. Now, I'm realistic enough that you're never going to reduce the in quote marks, failure rate to anywhere near zero. No matter how good a system is, there are always going to be kids who fall short of any halfway reasonable standard you set. But in a typical class of 30, that means there are 12 pupils who, according to their SATs results, aren't where they need to be in preparation for secondary school in at least one of reading, writing and maths. Now, when you look at it like that, it's not such a rosy picture, is it?
No, it's not. And 12 out of a class of 30 is a fair old chunk, isn't it?
And, you have to question whether, is 39% acceptable? And what is acceptable? Is it 35, 30, 20, 10?
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because if you say, well, 25 is not acceptable, but maybe 10 is, then you're saying, well, are we fudging the tests and making them so easy that they cease to have any value? Because the tests, I mean, you're going to hear me talk later on, at least I hope you are, about A-levels and how strongly I feel about those. Employers and parents all have a stake in the system, don't they, as the kids progress through school. And if you make the tests so easy that very few people drop below the required standard, then you run the risk of having tests which in themselves are meaningless. I see no reason at all for children to be tested at 7. I can see a test at 11 as they go into secondary school. And I guess there's got to be some measure of how they're performing.
Yeah, and the tests at 7, so that's in year 2, I guess they're slightly different insofar that they're not marked externally, but even so, there's a certain degree of pressure, both from the schools and from, I guess, parents as well. Is that the kind of pressure you want to be putting on a 7-year-old?
My personal view is no, you don't. The older I have got, the more my children have progressed through the education system, particularly through school, that the less in favour of formal tests I have become. And I do very much think that we've got a 19th and 20th century education system trying to fit our children for life in the 21st century. There really, I think, needs to be a big overhaul of the education system. Almost to the extent, my wife makes this point about the NHS, that she would try and take it completely out of politics. I would try and do much the same with the education system, just remove it from politics altogether, because I don't think, looking back over the past 20 years that I've had children in the education system, I don't think the political interference has ever been beneficial.
Politics by its nature is driven by short-term objectives, where the 5-year lifespan of a parliament is considered long-term. And I think there is a real case for, if you want to drive real significant change, you don't necessarily want to leave it in the hands of politicians, and you also need to find a way to overcome the fears and concerns and a natural resistance to change from the teaching profession as well. What you're talking about is a fairly radical overhaul to meet with the demands of a workplace that's changing very rapidly in front of our eyes.
Yes, I am. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, bear with me if I've made this point before, I've reached an age where I seem to make most points 3 or 4 times now to anybody who'll listen. One of the things that's depressed me as my children have gone through school is how very similar their lessons have been to the lessons that I did. Some of the essays they've written have been the same essays that I wrote, all that time ago.
And it's interesting, again, is the system changing, and are the measurements that we're trying to drive through the SATs, will they ever succeed in trying to drive the kind of change that the system needs? In theory, we should be able to compare this year's SATs results to last year's ones. So, an improvement from 53 to 61%. Is it a sign of improvement? Are there other factors at play? And I go back to the fact that the new curriculum was only introduced in 2014. So, that means that pupils sitting SATs for the first time last year had spent just 2 years being taught under the old Key Stage 2 curriculum and then 2 years under the new one, whereas this year's cohort had the benefit of having had 3 out of 4 years in the new curriculum. You look back to the kids who took it last year, that must have been disruptive to have had the curriculum change on them midway through.
Absolutely, and you also say is a jump from 53 to 61 simply an indication that teachers have become better with one year's more practice? Have they become better at teaching to the requirements of the test?
Yeah, and certainly, speaking to friends of mine who are teachers, they say that the change to the new curriculum was pushed upon them with very little consultation, very quickly, in order to be politically expedient. Bearing in mind that 2014 was a year before a general election, and was it well thought through? I'm not really sure it was. And we know that politicians aren't really interested in waiting for a few years to introduce a new system and to wait for valid, robust data when they're quite happy to jump all over a single data point that supports their narrative. And when I look into the overall principles behind the SATs, there are 2 big things that concern me. So, maybe let's talk about these one at a time. So firstly, yes, reading, writing and maths are core skills that all children should have a basic foundation in. I don't think anyone would argue against that, but that's not all there is to a primary school education, is there? So, it makes me wonder if there's a danger of schools becoming so focused on churning out good SAT scores to the exclusion of everything else. After all, that's how they're measured. There are published league tables that parents scrutinise when choosing between schools. So, I mean, Mark, what do you think about having this almost ruthless focus just on those core skills?
I think there's some merit in parents having information. I think that's fair. Parents as consumers of education are entitled to some information. But I think, speaking from my own experience as a parent, you combine the raw data which the SATs give you with the anecdotal evidence, conversations with friends who have children at various schools, and also just your own local knowledge of schools. I'm an absolute advocate of schools giving a much broader education than just reading, writing, and a basic level of competence in maths. And that's why the narrow curriculums I find particularly depressing. There are so many skills that children and young adults need now, which is simply not covered by the national curriculum or by any school curriculum.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess this is at the heart of my concern. I worry that SATs are only showing us a small part of the bigger picture. What about the things that aren't directly measured? Developing skills in critical thinking, building confidence, communication skills, the adaptability to deal with change. And then, what about other subjects? What about science, history, geography, technology, the arts, sports, all the other components of a broad-based education? And none of these are covered in SATs and the results.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the TED talk from Ken Robertson, is it? The one where he talks about creativity being right at the bottom of the school priority list. That schools have always, and this is a talk which goes back 10 years, where schools will prioritize things like arithmetic, maths, the academic subjects, because they're easy to measure, whereas the creative subjects get pushed right to the bottom of the list. And if a school is looking to make savings on its curriculum, it's the creative ones which go first. And yet those are the subjects which pupils really are going to need in the future if they are going to work effectively in the jobs which are now becoming prevalent,
And we've seen over the last 30 to 40 years advances in technology, so robotics that have replaced a lot of manufacturing jobs, computing automation that have replaced a lot of fairly manual tasks. And we're already starting to see things like driverless cars. What's the impact of that going to be on the transport industry and so on? And the nature of work is going to fundamentally change over the next 20 years, even the next 10 years. So, is there a danger that we're going to be producing a generation of children who can, they can read a bar chart and they know what an adverbial phrase is, but maybe they're patently unfit, they have underdeveloped communication skills, they've forgotten how to focus on their creative side. And it's that creative side of things that's the last thing that will be automated by computing and electronic technology. Are we preparing our kids in the right way, as you've said, for the skills and the jobs that will be available for them in the future?
Yeah, let me be fair to the education system. It is very difficult to prepare a child for a job which doesn't yet exist. But that's what we've got to do, isn't it? 10 years from now, how many people grew up wanting to be social media managers? Well, everybody we know is now a social media manager, aren't they?
Yeah.
I think that's very difficult. Therefore, you have got to teach skills which will allow children to adapt in the future. I was talking to somebody the other day who'd been an educationalist, who is now heavily involved in training at a very high level, saying that in 10, 20 years' time, never mind this concept that people would have more than one job, he painted a reasonable picture of people having 20 or 30 different income streams. Schools preparing children for a job for life with one company, just simply, that's not going to exist anymore. You talk about communication skills, Tim. I will tell you that the best thing any of my children did, the single best thing that any of my children did at school, was Alex doing public speaking competitions. And that has gave him confidence from a very, very young age. And he can communicate, and that's a priceless skill.
No, absolutely. And I think if we can give our kids the skills to have the confidence to deal with what's going to be an increasingly uncertain future, then that's about as good a start as they can have in life. Now, I talked about there being two big concerns I had, and the second one is, it's all very well saying that the new curriculum sets higher standards that we want our kids to meet, and so therefore the overall percentage meeting the expected standards are lower. But I do wonder if anyone has considered the effect of setting that higher standard on the children themselves. So, you go back to 2015, there were only 1 in 5 pupils who were failing to reach the expected standard across the core subjects. Last year, suddenly it was close to half, and this year it's a little bit less, but it's still 2 in 5. So, I mean, what's the psychological impact of having 39% of primary school pupils effectively being told that they're deficient in a core area? That's a lot of kids being told that they're not at the level they should be before going to what's already a big, scary world of secondary school. And I do wonder have we really factored the impact of that? Suddenly we have all these kids who are being told, do you know what, you're actually not good enough.
When you've got a very, very high number like that, it almost becomes the acceptable norm, doesn't it? Kids shrug and say, okay, well, I'm not good enough, but all my friends aren't good enough either. So, we're going to get by. We're going to accept it. I mean, school is a cruel place because you very quickly learn from your own peer group that you are not good enough in a lot of areas, whether it's football. I mean, if you think back to your class at school, Tim, there was someone who was good at singing. There was somebody who was good at sport. There was somebody who could just do maths. And however hard you tried, you would never be able to sing or play football or do maths as well as that particular person could. I'm not one who thinks that every child should automatically pass every test with flying colours, because I think that does a disservice as well. But I think when a test is labelling half the kids as inadequate, that there's got to be something wrong with that, hasn't there?
Absolutely agree with you. I think it benefits no one to have everyone passing for the sake of passing, and I will accept that it may well be that the old standard that had 80% reaching the expected level, maybe that standard wasn't high enough. But it does seem to me that the new curriculum was introduced in a real hurry for the benefit of policymakers, and with scant regard for the impact on kids, or indeed on the teachers who then had to deliver that curriculum. And I also understand the new system is already under review, which suggests that maybe this was a plan that was perhaps not as well thought through as it might have been. And going back to an earlier point you made, I mean, I completely agree that there are some real positives about having SATs, about having something that's measurable, about having league tables. It does hold poorer performing schools to account. And I just wish that I was more confident that all these new measures had been implemented thinking about the kids first, and that they gave us more of a rounded view of both schools and pupils' performance. And as you've alluded to already, I mean, is the system preparing them in the right way for what awaits them out in the working world? And on that count, I'm thoroughly unconvinced. So, any further thoughts?
No, only that you can't be as unconvinced as I am, and I think this is where parents have got a huge role to play, because I think what parents do with their children outside school is every bit as much as what school does with your kids inside school. The more experiences I think you can give your children outside school, for single parents, for parents who don't have much money, that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. But school, I think now, if you recognise that school is providing an education which perhaps isn't fitting your children for the world of the future, then it devolves back onto the parents, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Onto the parents and onto the teachers as well. And one of the things that worried me is, it's no surprise that politicians try to put a positive spin on things, and it's apparent that the government are keen to paint this bright new education system as being in a rude state of health. I mean, I saw School Standards Minister Nick Gibb talking about praising the hard work of teachers and pupils and our new knowledge-rich curriculum, and how it was giving children the best start in life. And that's where both you and I have some concerns about whether the delivery is living up to the rhetoric, because I see a reality where schools are struggling more than ever to ensure that they can deliver the basics, where things such as summer fates are not nice to do's, they're need to do's. They're increasingly critical to help close gaps in funding by putting a little bit more of the onus back onto parents to contribute to their children's education. Class sizes get bigger, the computers get older, teachers are digging into their own pockets more and more to ensure that they have essential supplies. Music and sports equipment is harder to come by, And it seems to me that teachers seem to spend as much time writing reports as they do actually teaching. And, teaching kids is not the easiest job in the world by any means, for starters. And the challenges for teachers are, and the skills that are required, we expect so many of them to be multi-skilled. You don't have the luxury necessarily of having a dedicated sports teacher anymore. You don't necessarily have the luxury of having a dedicated music teacher. I saw a story in the news, I think it was last week, about a school in Essex where they're now binning music lessons for 11 to 13-year-olds because they don't have anyone to teach them, and the head teacher believes that the money is spent elsewhere. And, this all points towards an increasing prioritisation and narrowing of the curriculum towards ensuring that schools deliver the results they need to score highly in the league tables. So I'm a hardened old cynic, I'll be the first to admit that, but I do genuinely hope that the new curriculum and SATs do start to help drive improved education in the long term. But from where I stand at the moment, the latest SATs numbers and the spin surrounding them are just another case of lies, damn lies and statistics from a governmental system that seems to be more intent on caring about gaining political capital than about delivering the kind of real, meaningful and significant change to prepare kids for a world that is fundamentally different from the one that exists today. So we can but hope. Now, a Southend mother hit the news last week for refusing to accept an award from one of her children's primary schools. One of her kids achieved 100% attendance. She said that such awards demonise the weak. Does she have a point? Let's start with the whole concept of end-of-year school prizes in general. Now, these can cover everything from academic achievement to sporting prowess to simply showing up in class every day. And from a broad perspective, do we think school prizes and awards are a good thing to have?
Yes, I think I do. I speak as a parent whose children picked up, I guess, their reasonable share of awards. But yeah, on balance, I think so. Although I'm somewhat jaundiced about awards for turning up.
Yeah, I think in general, it's kind of school prizes and awards, I'm similar to you. I think they shouldn't be considered a bad thing at all. I mean, if you're one of the best in your year at a particular thing, then, why not have something to strive for? I mean, both Isaac and Toby have previously won prizes at primary school, and both of them came home bursting with pride. I mean, in particular Isaac, who's, he is very much motivated by working towards goals and achievements, so he loves this kind of thing, and it really does help him to push himself that little bit harder. Now, of course, there's much more to life than prizes, but on the whole, I'd agree with you. I think they're good things. Now, let's move on to things that we think are perhaps a little bit more dubious, and let's talk specifically about these attendance awards. Now, I do get where these come from. One of a school's primary key performance indicators is their overall attendance rate, and there is research that shows that particularly in the formative years of a child's education, there's a correlation between attendance and achievement, which is why the metric exists and why schools focus so much on it. I completely get that schools should focus on discouraging absences, but are attendance awards the right way to do it? Should we be rewarding a child who doesn't miss a day of school, but not rewarding one who, say, has missed, 5 or 6 days because they had the flu, or they broke their arm representing the school at football, or something like that? Is that right? When
you put it like that, it's not right, is it? Alex at Sixth Form College missed very little. They did have a system of rewarding 100% attendance. If you were there every day for a month, then you got effectively lottery tickets in the school lottery. But it's not really fair, is it, that kids who, nobody wants to catch flu, but we all do catch flu from time to time. And as you say, if you break your leg playing football for the school, well, it hardly seems fair to rule you out of the lottery.
We talked just now about preparing kids for the world of work. Now, when you're working, yes, if you're persistently absent, you will get pulled up, but nobody gets a reward for taking no sick days in a year. You don't get a bonus for it. And yes, I do understand this is about trying to make sure that kids don't have persistent absenteeism, but yeah, there is a big part of me that feels like receiving an award for good attendance is a bit like the way that some schools give out medals to everyone who competes in a race at sports day, regardless of whether they're first, second or last. And I'm not a big fan of giving out awards for just turning up. And that's what an attendance award feels like to me. So, I mean, our primary school gives out attendance awards at their prize giving day, and I don't agree with them. And I've also noticed that the attendance certificates are A4 sized, whereas the ones for academic and sporting achievement are A5 sized, i.e. half the size. Now, whether that's deliberate or accidental, and it may well be the latter, that sends out completely the wrong message for me. And funnily enough, while we keep and allow the boys to display their academic awards in their bedroom, the attendance awards somehow seem to have found their way into the recycling.
I don't agree with awards. Turn up and do your best is kind of a given for me. It's not something that merits an award.
Going back to health-related absences, is the way attendance is rewarded fair on children who are more susceptible to health issues? So the mum who was the subject of this particular article, she has 3 sons. Yes, one of them got his 100% award that was rejected, but her eldest son has cerebral palsy. And she also rightly points out that there are children at their school with chronic asthma and other conditions that consequently have a much higher risk of illness absence. And I remember my younger brother had severe asthma as a child, and there were a number of occasions on which he was hospitalised. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't go into school. The playing field's not even, is it? I mean, should children like this be penalised for having a physical condition that significantly reduces their chance of achieving 100% attendance? That just doesn't seem right, does it?
No, I mean, they just simply cannot do that, can they?
Yeah, and equally, you could have a kid who's in school every day of the year, whose attention constantly wanders in class, and you could have a star pupil who misses 3 days in hospital after a severe asthma attack, and who is it that ends up getting rewarded? And that's when you look at it like that. And yes, I know I'm talking about 2 fairly extreme polar opposites there. It does seem a bit ridiculous, doesn't it?
It does, but let me just put the other side of the other side of the argument. That they have attendance awards at the sixth form college that Alex has just finished at. In one of my first meetings when I was first a parent governor, I asked this question: do they work? Surely we shouldn't be rewarding children for just turning up. The head had some fairly detailed data to say they work. And I was quite sceptical about the data, but when he explained it and when I looked through it, attendance was marginally better where awards for attendance were in operation.
I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? Because you then wonder, what's the reason why? Is it because children are more focused and driven by attendance awards? Is it because teachers focus more on providing engaging lessons and experiences? Or is there also a danger that sometimes actually that positive data is driven by potentially negative behaviours in parents? It doesn't take too much of a stretch of the imagination to see a parent sending an ill child to school in order to maintain their 100% record, which
their 100% record. Yeah, I mean, I can't think that I could ever imagine doing that. And I think by the time the children get to the sixth form college stage, that they're going to make their own decision as to whether they're well enough or not well enough to go to school. As I say, I was very, very surprised by this data, but marginally, they do seem to work.
But yeah, that's kind of really interesting to see that side of the argument as well. And I guess that argument makes a lot more sense to me, particularly at sixth form college level, where, as you say, the children are much more involved in terms of making their own decision about whether they're well enough to attend, about whether they want to attend. And I guess I wonder whether at a primary school level, the focus is more on targeting the parents. We've talked previously about parents who take their kids out of school during term time, the detrimental effect that potentially has both on the child and potentially on their classmates as well. So yeah, it's really interesting to see what the impact of that is at different levels of the education system. In conclusion, I guess my question is the whole attendance award thing, particularly when we're talking about primary schools, is this a case of addressing the right problem with the wrong solution? should we distinguish between rewarding someone who has 100% attendance and someone who has 98% attendance? And is the real problem really that we should be focusing on that small minority of children who are persistently and unnecessarily absent or truant, or whatever the appropriate word is for that now? Should we be focusing on them rather than kids who miss the occasional day here and there for what are frequently valid and understandable reasons?
Providing your child is not persistently absent, then the occasional day missed because of illness makes very little difference in the long run. We never took our children out of school for holidays, but I think I would be more relaxed about that than many parents. But I'm with you, basically, Tim. I think there are far greater priorities than putting a system in place which rewards somebody who is there for 100% of the time during a term and doesn't reward someone who's there for 98% of the time.
Indeed. And so on that note, I'm just going to pause to take the podcast register. So Mark, I have you down as present. And well done, have a certificate. So before we go, what have we been up to recently? Mark?
It's 10 days now until Alex and I attempt to walk 40 miles across the North York Moors in 24 hours. So what I've basically been up to is training for that when I've not been, just doing the day job, writing the book. I seem to find myself quite addicted to any long-range weather forecast now because 10 days from now, I do not want rain.
Well, good luck with that, and I'll keep an eye on the weather forecast for you.
Yeah. Saturday the 22nd is the day. Yeah.
As for us, we've had a busy week actually. We had my wife's cousin and his fiancée stopping off from Canada for a few days before they headed into Europe. The kids always love having visiting relatives. Gives them new people to read to them and play games with. And we've also had end-of-year school reports for the boys. Cara had already had an excellent first report last week, and the boys both had very good reports too, which is always nice. And then we had the usual weekend of dad taxiing, so gym class, cricket training, birthday parties, barbecues. Yeah, I'm not sure who was more knackered at the end of it, the kids or us. And that's it for this episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find the two of us online. Mark?
Yeah, I'm at bestdadicanbe.com, at bestdadicanbe on Twitter, and the book, our Pennine Way book, markrichards.co.uk.
And you can find me at snouchingtowardsthatcham.com and on social media as @ThatchamDad. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and Android devices, on our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. You can also follow us on Twitter at ParentsPodcast and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. So thanks for listening, and do please join us again next week. Good night.